I want to tell you about a girl named Joss. But before I do, I need you to understand something. I never wanted to be in a story like this. I was the kid in the back row who got a C- in chemistry and ate lunch alone because it was easier than talking to people. I was nobody. I'm still nobody, really. The thing is, sometimes nobody is the only one left to tell you what happened. So listen. This is the year the war came back to my town, and the year I learned that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the most dangerous one, not because she wants to be, because somebody, somewhere, decided to make her that way. Her name was Joss Calderon, and she just wanted to graduate high school. That's it, that was the whole dream. You'd be amazed how many people died trying to take it from her. Let me start at the beginning, because if I don't, none of it makes sense. The war ended 4 years before any of this. The real war, the one up there. You have to understand what the sky looked like when I was a kid. There was nothing in it. Stars, the moon, a plane sometimes blinking red and white. That was it. That was the whole sky for thousands of years for everybody who ever lived before us. And then one morning, there were 3 new lights up there that didn't move like stars. I was 7. My mom took me out to the backyard in my pajamas and pointed, and her hand was shaking. I remember the shaking more than the lights. Adults aren't supposed to shake. That's the first time I learned they could. Those 3 lights were Accord beacons. Watchers. The galaxy had found us, and the galaxy was not friendly, and the galaxy was already at war with something worse than itself. I'm not going to give you the whole history lesson. You've heard it. The Greld came through the outer dark like a tide that ate suns, and the Accord the big council of 1,000 species, all of them older and smarter and richer than us. The Accord was losing. Badly. Their ships were beautiful and their soldiers were tall and their guns could core a moon, and they were still losing, because the Greld didn't feel fear and didn't feel pain and didn't stop. And then somebody on the council, some clerk I bet, looked at a little blue planet full of monkeys who just split their own atom and thought, well, they're expendable. Let's see what they do. You know what we did. I'm not going to puff it up. I was a kid through most of it. I saw it the way kids see things in pieces, on broadcasts, in the way my dad stopped sleeping and my teacher cried at her own desk one afternoon and didn't explain why. But here's the part that matters for Joss. The Accord expected us to die. We were a death world. That's what they called Earth, a death world. High gravity, predators, bacteria that could kill a Selvath in an hour, whether that could erase a town. They figured we'd be good for one thing, throwing bodies at the Greld until the Greld got bored. We did throw bodies. God, we threw so many. But we didn't get bored, and we didn't stop, and we didn't run. And somewhere out there in the dark between stars, the soldiers of 1,000 species watched the humans hold a line that everything else had broken on, and they learned a new word for us. The word wasn't hero. The word was closer to afraid. They won the war with us, and the day after they won it, they were more scared of us than they'd ever been of the Greld. Remember that. It comes back later. It comes back in my school cafeteria of all the stupid places. Okay, Cedar Hollow. That's my town. You've never heard of it and you never will. It's tucked up in a fold of mountains where the highway has to slow down to get through, and it's the kind of place where everybody knows your truck before they know your face. Population about 4,000. 1 stoplight, and people still argue about whether we needed it. After the war, the Accord set up these things they call observance posts. Basically embassies, except an embassy is supposed to be friendly, and these were not. Every region on Earth got one. Ours was about 40 miles north, up past the reservoir, this gray building that grew out of the ground in about a week and didn't look like it was built so much as poured. The Selvath ran it. They were the Accord's lawyers and police and accountants all rolled into one species, and they did not like us. I'll describe a Selvath for you, because you need to see them. Tall, way too tall, like 7 feet, and thin the way a knife is thin. 4 eyes, too big and too small, set in a long pale face that didn't move much. They wore this armor that was always clean. That's the thing I remember most. It was always clean, no matter what. Polished gray plate and a kind of collar at the throat that did their translating, so their voice came out flat and correct, and a half-second behind their mouth. Smelled like cold metal and something medical. They came down to town sometimes. Inspections, they called it. Counting us. Making sure we hadn't built anything we weren't allowed to build. Their transports came over the ridge low and silent, and the dogs would lose their minds for a mile in every direction, and folks would stop on the sidewalk and watch the things go by with their hands jammed in their pockets and their jaws tight. We weren't allowed to hate them out loud. That was in the treaty somewhere, so we hated them quiet, the way mountain people hate everything they can't get rid of, patiently. That was the world. That was Cedar Hollow when Joss showed up. She came in the fall, which is the worst time to be new anywhere, because everybody's friend groups have already set like concrete over the summer. First day I saw her was a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because Tuesdays we had the bad cafeteria pizza, the kind where the cheese came off in one sheet, and I was sitting with my tray doing my usual nothing, and Mrs. Ockhaffer walked a new girl in through the side doors. I'll tell you what I noticed, in the order I noticed it, because it tells you who she was before I knew anything. First thing, she was older. Not a lot, but there's a difference between a 17-year-old and whatever she was, and your eye catches it even if your brain can't name it. She moved like an adult moves, settled, like her body already knew where the floor was. Second thing, she sat with her back to the wall. There was an open seat at the end of the popular table, easy, obvious, and she walked right past it to the corner table nobody used, and she put her back to the cinder block and faced the doors. I didn't think anything of it then. I think about it all the time now. Third thing, she was so still. You know how everybody in a cafeteria is always moving a little, tapping, fidgeting, scrolling, twitching. She wasn't. She held a carton of milk in both hands and she looked at the room the way you'd look at a frozen lake you had to cross, reading it. Where's the thin ice? Where's the way out? And the fourth thing, the thing that took me longer to see, was the scar. It ran from under her left ear down into her collar, thin and pale and very straight, the kind of straight that doesn't happen by accident. A car wreck gives you a messy scar. A dog gives you a torn one. That one was placed. I was 17 and dumb, and I thought, new girl, weird, and I went back to my pizza. That's the part I'd take back if I could. Not because anything bad happened to me, but because she sat alone for 3 weeks before I said a single word to her, and she had already been more alone than I will ever be in my life, and I let her sit there. The first thing anybody learned about her was that she didn't react to the bell. Cedar Hollow High has this bell, this ancient electric thing, and it doesn't ring so much as detonate. It's loud enough to stop your heart for half a second every single time, and everybody hates it, and everybody jumps anyway. For years I went to that school and I jumped at that bell 4 years running. Joss never once flinched at it. But I watched her that first week. I'd started watching her, the way you watch anything that doesn't fit, and there was this day a kid dropped a metal lunch tray flat on the tile. You know that sound, that crack and clatter. She was up. I mean, she was up before the tray finished bouncing. Up out of her seat, low, one hand flat on the table, the other already moving toward her hip where there was nothing, body turned toward the sound, and her eyes, I'd never seen eyes do that. They went flat and wide at the same time. Hunting and hunted both. Took her maybe a second to come back. To see it was a tray, a kid, a cafeteria. You could watch her file it. Not a threat. Stand down. She sat back down slow and put her hands around her milk again and didn't look at anybody. A couple kids laughed. The mean little laugh, you know the one. I didn't laugh. Because my uncle came back from a war, a regular human war. The dumb kind we used to have all by ourselves before the sky changed, and he did that exact thing at Thanksgiving when my cousin popped a balloon. Same up and down. Same flat eyes. My dad walked him to the porch and they stood out there in the cold for an hour and didn't say anything and came back in fine. So I knew that thing when I saw it. I didn't know where Joss had gotten it, but I knew what it was. It was a body that had learned a lesson the brain couldn't unlearn. I want to slow down here and tell you about the ordinary parts, because everybody who tells this story online jumps straight to the cafeteria and the soldiers and the blood. They skip the part that matters most. The part that matters most is that for a little while, Joss got to be normal. And she was so bad at it and so happy about it that it broke my heart even before I understood why. She wanted everything. That's the thing. Every dumb little normal thing the rest of us couldn't wait to be done with, she wanted like it was gold. Homework, she loved homework. Loved it. There was this assignment in history, write 3 pages on the causes of some old human war from before the sky changed, and the rest of us groaned. And I saw her face do this thing, this small private lighting up, like somebody had handed her a present. She turned in 11 pages. Mrs. Acaffer pulled her aside and asked gentle, was everything okay? And Joss said, I just wanted to do it right. And Mrs. Acaffer, who had been teaching for 30 years, said okay and didn't push, and gave her an A and didn't dock her for length. Because some teachers are smart enough to know when a kid is holding onto a thing for dear life. Lunch lines. She'd stand in the lunch line and look at the menu board like it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever read. Chicken patty, tater tots, chocolate milk or white. She'd take so long deciding that people would sigh behind her and she'd apologize and pick the chocolate milk every time like it was a decision that mattered and carry it back to her wall seat like she'd won something. I asked her about it once. Later, when we were sort of friends, I said, you always get the chocolate one. And she got quiet and then she said, where I was, you didn't pick. You got what they gave you and you were grateful and you didn't waste it. She turned the carton in her hands. Nobody's ever let me pick before. I'm going to pick every single day for the rest of my life. I didn't know what to say to that. I was 17. I said, the chocolate one's better anyway, and she laughed, and it was a real laugh surprised out of her, and I felt like I'd won the lottery. The way we actually became friends was stupid, and I'll tell it fast. It was a Thursday and it was raining, the cold kind that gets in through your collar, and I'd missed the late bus because I'd stayed to retake a quiz I was going to fail either way. I was standing under the awning by the gym doors trying to figure out if I'd rather walk 3 miles in the rain or call my dad and admit I'd missed the bus again. And Joss came out, hood up, and stopped, and looked at me standing there soaked and miserable and said, you walking? Thinking about it. You'll get sick. She said it flat like a fact, like the floor is hard. Then she pulled a folding umbrella out of her bag, this beat-up little thing, and held it out. Take it. Bring it back. What about you? She looked up at the rain, and she smiled this small, strange smile, and she said, I like it. We didn't have weather where I was. I didn't know what that meant. We didn't have weather. But I took the umbrella because I was cold, and I said thanks, and she walked off into the rain with her hood up and her face tipped back to feel it. I brought the umbrella back the next day. And the day after that, I sat at her wall table at lunch instead of mine. And she looked surprised, and then she looked something else, careful, like she was scared to want it. And she pushed her chocolate milk an inch toward the middle of the table, which I understood somehow was the most generous thing she knew how to do. That's how I got a friend. I still didn't know what she was. I want you to feel how long that lasted me, sitting next to it every day, eating bad pizza next to it and not knowing. There were signs. I told myself they were nothing. She knew where every exit in the building was. Not vaguely, exactly. We were walking down B Hall once, and a fire alarm test went off, and before the rest of us had even registered it, she'd already turned us toward the nearest stairwell, one hand light on my shoulder, steering, like it was the most natural thing in the world, and she'd done it before her face even changed. She couldn't sit with her back to a door. Couldn't. We tried a different table once because ours was taken and she got this tightness around her eyes and ate fast and barely talked. And I figured it out and switched tables again. And she relaxed. And she never said thank you for it, but she looked at me like she'd been understood, and that was better. She had a thing about food going to waste. Couldn't stand it. She'd eat every crumb, scrape the tray, and if she saw somebody dump a full tray in the trash, she'd go still and quiet for a minute, like it physically hurt her. And the scars, not just the one on her neck. There were others when the sleeves rode up. Little round ones on her forearm, 4 of them in a neat row like fingertips. A long one across the back of one hand. And on her left palm, when she opened it, a strange shiny patch like the skin had been melted and regrown, smooth and wrong. I asked about the palm one. Once. We were close enough by then that I thought I could. She looked at it like she'd forgotten it was there. Then she said, I grabbed something I shouldn't have, to keep it from grabbing somebody else. And she closed her hand, and that was the whole answer, and I learned not to ask. I told myself, bad foster homes maybe. A rough life. Some kids have rough lives. I didn't let myself do the math because the math was crazy and because I liked her, and because if I did the math I'd have to know that my one friend had been somewhere I couldn't follow and couldn't fix. So I didn't do the math. The Selvath did it for me. In about 4 minutes flat on a Wednesday in the cafeteria. They did the math out loud in front of everybody. Let me set the day for you. Because it was the most ordinary day in the world, right up until it wasn't. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving break, so the whole school had that loose, restless, almost free feeling. Half the teachers had given up. There were paper turkeys taped crooked on the cafeteria windows that the art club had made, and somebody had drawn glasses on one of them. It had snowed the night before, the first real snow, and it was still coming down soft outside the big windows, and everybody kept looking at it. You couldn't help it. First snow does that. Joss couldn't stop looking at it. She had her chin in her hand and she was watching the snow come down, and there was this look on her face I'd never seen, soft and open and young, finally young, like all the careful had melted off her. And I remember thinking, she's pretty when she forgets to be scared. And I remember being glad she got to have this. The snow, the paper turkey with glasses, the chocolate milk. I remember being glad. Hold on to that because the next part is hard. We didn't have seasons, she said, not looking away from the window. On the stations, just recycled air, same temperature always. You forget the skies even there. She breathed out. I used to dream about snow. I didn't even know if I'd ever seen it or if I just made it up. You've seen it now, I said. Yeah, quiet, I have. That's when the dogs would have started barking if there'd been dogs. Instead, it was the lights. The cafeteria lights stuttered just once, this little brownout flicker, and outside the windows the falling snow went strange and slow for a second, like the air itself had thickened. Joss's face changed. I watched the soft go out of it. I watched something old and cold come up under it like a fish coming up under ice. She sat up straight. She set her milk down very carefully, both hands, and she turned in her seat to face the main doors, and she said, in a voice I'd never heard her use, low and flat and certain, Theo, get under the table. What, why? That's a suppression field. They cut the grid. Her eyes were already moving, ceiling, doors, windows, counting. There's a Selvath squad about to come through that door, and they didn't call ahead. They never don't call ahead. She looked at me, and for 1 second she was just a scared kid, my friend, and then it was gone and she was something else. Please, under the table, now. I didn't get under the table. I'm not telling you that to make me sound brave. I'm telling you because I was frozen, the way you freeze, and because I'd never once in my life seen Joss afraid, and her being afraid frightened me more than anything coming through any door. The doors opened. There were 5 of them. I'd seen Selvath before, like I said, at a distance, going by in transports. I'd never been in a room with them. Up close they were worse. They had to duck under the doorframe, all 5, this smooth practiced duck, and they came in spread out, 2 and 2 and 1, and they moved without any sound at all. The cafeteria had been the loud roar of 300 kids, and in about 2 seconds it was dead silent, the kind of silent that has a sound to it, a ringing. Their armor was clean. I keep coming back to that. 5 tall, thin gray figures and not a speck on any of them, and the snow melting off their shoulders in little beads. They had weapons across their chests, long and dark and bristled with something, held loose but ready. And the one in the middle, the one without a weapon out, had more on his collar than the others. Gold thread in the gray. Officer. He had a device in his hand. Flat, glowing. He held it up and swept it across the room, slow, and it made a soft tone, and I realized it was scanning. Looking. The little beam crawled over faces, over kids who'd gone white, over teachers frozen with their coffee halfway up. The tone changed when it crossed Joss. It went from a soft pulse to a hard, flat whine, and every Selveth head in the room turned to her at once, all 4 eyes each, 20 cold eyes, snapping to my friend at the corner table. The officer looked at his device, looked at her, and he spoke, and his collar turned it into that flat half-second late English, too loud in the silence. Designation confirmed. Human combat asset, Greld Front, 12th Reclamation Cohort. Field name, a pause, a click, like he was reading Ashfall. I felt the word land in the room. I didn't know what it meant, but the way he said it, the way the other 4 shifted their grips on their weapons when he said it, like he'd named something that wasn't supposed to still be alive. I looked at Joss. She'd stood up, slow, hands open and out from her sides low where they could see them, and her face, God, her face had gone perfectly calm, not the careful calm I knew, a different one, a deep one, the kind of calm you only get on the far side of being more afraid than a person can survive. That was a long time ago, she said, quiet, steady. The war's over, I'm a student here, I'm not anybody's asset. You are unregistered, the officer said. Combat-grade human war material is not permitted to integrate into civilian population centers absent Accord oversight. You will be detained for reclassification and transport. No, Joss said, just that. No, I won't. I need to explain something fast before I tell you what happened, or it won't make sense. I learned all of this later, pieces from her, pieces from the news after, pieces I had to put together myself lying awake. When the Accord pulled humans into the war, they didn't just take soldiers. Soldiers they could have handled. What scared them after wasn't the soldiers. It was what they'd made out of some of the soldiers. The Greld front was the worst front, the grinder. And on the worst fronts, the Accord and the humans ran programs. Took kids 14, 15, 16, kids who'd lost everything, kids nobody would come asking after, and they trained them and changed them and pushed them and turned them into something that could do what no Accord soldier could do, which was hold a line against the Greld and not break. They called them assets. They gave them field names instead of real ones, because real names were a liability, because you don't get attached to a thing you might have to spend. Joss had been one of them. She'd been Ashfall. She had held lines. She had done things on stations 40 light years from the snow she'd just been watching fall, things she was 14, 15, 16 years old when she did them, and the Accord had built her to do them, and then the war had ended. And here's the thing nobody planned for. Here's the thing that put 5 soldiers in my cafeteria. When the war ended, the Accord had a few hundred of these human assets left alive, weapons they'd made, and they could not unmake them. You can't untrain a thing like that. You can't send it home because it doesn't have a home, you took its home to make it. So the Accord's plan, the official, treaty-approved, very reasonable-sounding plan, was to reclassify the surviving assets as Accord war material and keep them contained, studied, stored. Joss ran. She got back to Earth in the chaos of the war's end, in a refugee crush, with forged papers and a field-melted hand and a dream she'd been holding onto since she was 14. The dream wasn't revenge. It wasn't medals. The dream, I know this because she told me after, the dream was to sit in a classroom, to do homework, to pick chocolate milk, to see snow, to have the childhood they'd cut out of her and thrown away. She got 8 weeks of it. 8 weeks in Cedar Hollow, at the corner table by the wall. And then the Accord's accountants finally finished their math and sent 5 soldiers to file her back where she belonged. "You will comply," the officer said, "or you will be compelled. You are aware of what your designation is rated for. Do not make us demonstrate it on the juveniles present." That was a threat about us, the kids. He said it casual, the way you'd mention the weather. And that I saw it happen. That was the thing that changed the air around Joss. Because here's what I understand now that I didn't understand then. Joss wasn't dangerous because she was angry. The Accord's whole problem with the human assets, the reason they were terrified of them, was that the assets didn't break the way other species broke. You couldn't make them panic. You couldn't make them freeze. The humans they'd built had this thing, and the Selvath didn't have a word for it in any of their 1,000 languages, where the worse it got, the steadier they got. Where a human, pushed past the point any sane creature gives up, would just go quiet and certain and absolute, and decide a thing, and then nothing in the galaxy could move them off it. He just threatened a room full of kids. And I watched Joss decide a thing. She didn't get bigger, that's what's so strange. She didn't shout or square up. She got smaller, somehow lower, looser, and very, very still, and the calm on her face went all the way down to the bottom, and when she spoke her voice had no fear in it at all. Not hidden, just gone. "Walk it back," she said softly. "Whatever you were about to say about these kids, walk it back and walk out and tell them you couldn't find me. You can do that, it's easy. You go back up the ridge and you file the report and nobody here ever has to know how today could have gone. You are not in a position to." "I held the Tessin Gap," Joss said. And 5 Selvath soldiers flinched. I didn't know what the Tessin Gap was. The whole cafeteria didn't. But those 5 did, and I watched it go through them like a current, and the officer's flat face did a thing it wasn't built to do, and one of the soldiers at the back actually took a half-step back before he caught himself. 11 days, Joss said, still soft, still terribly gentle, like she was telling them a bedtime story. "You sent 4 cohorts in before me and the Gap ate all 4. You know who walked out. You read my file. You know my number." She tilted her head the smallest amount. "So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'm going to ask you nice, because there are children in this room, and I have spent 8 weeks remembering how to be a person, and I do not want to stop being one in front of them." She took one step, just one, toward 5 armored soldiers in a snow-white cafeteria with her hands open and empty. "Walk it back," she said, "please." And the officer raised his weapon. The officer raised his weapon. I want to be honest with you about what I did in that moment, because everybody who tells a story like this makes themselves brave. I wasn't brave. I made a sound, not even a word, just air. The dumb little noise a body makes when it finally understands it's about to watch something it can't survive watching. And Joss heard it. She didn't turn around. She couldn't, not with 5 weapons on her. But she heard me, and I saw her face do something, this flinch inward, like the noise had hurt her worse than the gun did. Because she just spent 8 weeks learning my name and my bad quiz grades and which milk I'd steal off her tray, and now I was 3 feet behind her making the sound a scared kid makes, and she'd promised herself she'd never make a child make that sound again. That, I think, is when she stopped trying to talk them out of it. "Okay," she said, soft to herself almost. "Okay." The officer's weapon hummed, a rising note charging. You have to understand how fast the next part was. I've stretched it out 1,000 times in my head, lying awake, slowing it down frame by frame so I could finally see it, but in the room in real time it was nothing. It was a blink. It was less than the time it takes the bell to ring. Joss moved. I've tried to describe it to people and I always fail, so I'll just tell you what my eyes caught and let you fill in the rest. She didn't run at them. That's the thing your brain expects, a charge, a lunge. She didn't. She dropped. straight down fast under the line of the officer's weapon, and the shot went over where her chest had been and hit the cinder block wall behind her, and the wall just wasn't there anymore. A hole punched clean through, edges glowing and cold snow air pouring in through it. And that's when the screaming started in the cafeteria, 300 kids all at once. But Joss was already inside the squad. That's the only way I know how to say it. 1 second she was alone in the open. The next she was inside them, in the space between their bodies where their long weapons were too long to bring around. And a Selvath is built tall and thin for a low-gravity life on clean stations, and Joss was built by a death world and a war. And the difference between those two things is the whole story. She took the officer's wrist in both hands, and there was a sound like a green branch breaking, and his weapon clattered on the tile. She didn't pick it up. I noticed that even then, even terrified. She kicked it away, spun it across the floor under the tables, away from us, away from the kids, gone. She wasn't trying to kill them. I figured that out watching her. A thing built to kill 5 Selvath would have used that gun. Joss kicked it away because a gun going off in a room full of children was the one thing she would not allow, and she'd rather do it the hard way with her hands than risk one stray shot finding one of us. So she did it the hard way. The one on the officer's left brought his weapon down like a club, fast, at her head. She wasn't there. She'd read it, I swear she read it before he started it, the way you'd read a sentence you've seen 100 times, and she rolled off it, took the soldier's arm as it came past, and used his own height against him, all that thin, tall leverage, and folded him down to the floor and put him there hard enough that he stopped moving and stayed stopped. 2 left standing now, and the officer cradling a broken wrist, and the one she dropped first not getting up. The 2 standing ones got smart. They backed off, gave themselves room, brought their weapons up to fire, and that was their mistake, because giving a human room is a thing you only do once. She crossed the distance. I keep using these flat little words, crossed, took, dropped, because the real thing didn't have words. There was a girl, my friend, who loved chocolate milk and homework and snow, and then there was this, and they were the same person, and watching them be the same person was the single most frightening and most beautiful thing I have ever seen and ever will. She crossed the distance before they could fire, and she was in among them again, and a weapon discharged straight up into the ceiling, because she'd shoved the barrel skyward as it went off, and ceiling tiles came down in a rain of white dust, and one of the paper turkeys, the one with the glasses, drifted down through the smoke and landed on the floor right side up in the middle of all of it. And I will never, as long as I live, forget that paper turkey looking up at the war happening over its head. Then it was over. It was over so fast that the screaming was still going when the last Selvath hit the floor. 5 of them down. None of them dead, I checked. After, the news checked. All 5 lived. 5 of the Accord soldiers laid out on cafeteria tile by a 17-year-old with her bare hands in under 10 seconds, and not one shot had touched a single kid. Joss stood in the middle of it, breathing hard, snow blowing in through the hole in the wall and settling on the shoulders of the fallen, on the dropped trays in her dark hair. And then she turned around and looked at me. I'll never forget her face right then, because it wasn't the soldier's face anymore. The soldier was already draining out of it fast, and what was coming up underneath was just Joss, scared, young, and underneath that, the thing she was most afraid of in the entire galaxy, which was not the soldiers, was not the Greld, was not any of it. It was the look she thought she'd see on my face. She thought I'd be afraid of her. She'd done the math everybody does. She'd shown me the monster they made, and now the kid who shared his fries with her was going to look at her the way the Selvath looked at her, like a thing, like material, like ashfall, and I watched her brace for it. She'd just gone through 5 soldiers without a flicker, and this was the part she had to brace for. Me, looking at her. So I want to tell you exactly what I did, because it's the only brave thing I did the whole day, and it didn't take any courage at all. It was the easiest thing in the world. I got up and I walked over through the snow and the dust and the groaning soldiers, and I picked up the paper turkey off the floor, the one with the glasses, and I held it out to her, and I said, I don't even know why I said it, it just came out. You want the chocolate milk, mine's still good. And Joss called Iran, field name Ashfall, who held the Tessin Gap for 11 days when 4 cohorts couldn't hold it for one, who had just put down 5 Accord soldiers in the time it takes to sneeze. She looked at the paper turkey in my hand, and her face crumpled, and she sat down right there on the floor in the middle of it all and she cried. Not pretty crying, the other kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere with no bottom, the kind a person cries when they've been holding something for years and somebody finally hands them a reason to put it down. I sat down next to her, on the cold tile in the snow with the soldiers groaning around us. I didn't touch her because I didn't know if she'd want it. I just sat, and after a while she leaned over just a little until her shoulder was against my shoulder and she let it be there. That was the bravest thing she did all day, not the fight, the leaning. The aftermath was a circus. I'm going to give you the real version, not the version that went around online, because the online version got most of it wrong. People say the whole school ran. They didn't. That's what gets me. A few kids bolted out the blown open wall into the snow, sure, but most of them, 300 terrified teenagers, most of them stayed, and it wasn't because they were brave. It was because of what they'd just watched. They'd watched her kick the gun away from us. You don't think kids notice things like that in the middle of chaos? They do. They notice everything. They'd seen 5 soldiers come in casual and threaten them, and they'd seen the quiet new girl who ate alone put herself between them and those soldiers and refuse to do it with a weapon because a weapon might hurt one of us. And teenagers are mean and dumb and cruel in 100 small ways. I'd know I was one, but they are not stupid, and they know exactly who's on their side and who isn't. So when the officer dragged himself up against the wall, cradling his wrist, and got his collar working again, and announced in that flat, too loud voice that the asset-designated Ashfall was now to be detained for the attempted murder of Accord personnel. The cafeteria did something I'd have bet my life it would never do. A kid named Dustin Pell, who I'd known since kindergarten, who was not brave, who once cried because he got a B, stood up. And he said, loud, shaking, "She didn't try to kill anybody. You're all still breathing. You shot first." And then Marisol Reyes stood up. I saw it. He aimed at her first. I'll say it to anybody. And then a teacher, Mr. Hosser, the gym teacher, who I'd always figured for a coward, stood up in front of the whole room in front of 5 Accord soldiers and said, "Everyone in this room saw the same thing. Everyone." And he looked around slow, and 300 kids looked back at him. And one by one, in 2s and 3s and then in a wave, they stood up too. 300 kids standing in a Snowden cafeteria with a hole blown in the wall, facing down the soldiers of 1,000 worlds, saying no. I think that's the part the Selveth couldn't process. I really do. They came down expecting to collect a weapon. They understood weapons. What they did not understand, what no Accord report had ever been able to explain about us, was why a roomful of unarmed juveniles would stand up for the dangerous thing in their midst, instead of running from it. They didn't get it because they'd never had it. The thing where you don't leave your people behind. The thing where your people means whoever's standing next to you when it goes bad, even if she's only been standing next to you for 8 weeks, even if she's the most terrifying person you've ever met, especially then. The officer looked at the standing kids for a long moment, all 4 eyes, and then he did the math one more time, a different math, and he lowered his hand, and he said the detainment would be deferred pending review, and the 5 of them gathered up their fallen and their dropped weapons and they limped out the way they came, into the snow, up the ridge, and they did not come back that day. It wasn't over, of course. Things like that are never over that clean. There were investigators, human ones first, sheriff, then state, then federal people in dark coats who didn't say which agency. Then accord liaisons, the soft kind, the diplomats who came with human translators and sat in our principal's office and asked careful questions, and were extremely polite in the way that means we have not given up, we are only being patient. They wanted Joss, make no mistake. The Accord wanted Ashfall back in a box more than they'd ever wanted anything, because every day she walked around free was a day every other surviving human asset out there, all those few hundred scattered ones, might get the idea that free was a thing they could be too. She wasn't a runaway to them. She was a precedent. And precedents are the one thing accountants truly fear. Here's what saved her. It wasn't the law. The law was murky and the treaty was on the Accord's side, and any honest lawyer would tell you Joss should have lost. What saved her was that 300 kids had phones. By that night it was everywhere. Not the clean official footage that got buried fast. The shaky phone videos. 40 of them, 50, from 40 different angles, all of them showing the same thing. The soldiers coming in, the officer threatening the children, the gun coming up first, and then the girl who wouldn't pick up a weapon in a room full of kids, the girl who kicked it away. And one video, the one that did it, the one that broke the whole thing open, somebody had been filming out the window at the snow, of all things, just the snow coming down. A dumb, pretty video for nobody, and they'd caught the audio. They'd caught Joss's voice clear before any of it started. I have spent 8 weeks remembering how to be a person, and I do not want to stop being one in front of them. That line went around the planet in about a day and a half. Because here's the thing about humans that the Accord built an entire war strategy around and still never understood. We are sentimental. Hopelessly. We are the species that will look at a weapon, at a thing built and bred and broken for killing, and instead of seeing the weapon we will see the 8 weeks. We will see the chocolate milk and the homework and the snow. We will look at the most dangerous thing in the room, and our first thought, our deepest, stupid, beautiful human thought will be, somebody hurt that kid and they shouldn't have, and I'm going to stand in front of her now. A billion people looked at Joss and didn't see Ashfall. They saw a girl who'd been robbed of her childhood, trying to steal a little of it back. And they decided, not the governments, the people all at once, the way people sometimes do, they decided she got to keep it. You cannot put a billion people back in a box. Even the Accord's accountants can run that math. It took most of a year. Lawyers and councils and treaties getting rewritten, and a new word getting invented in human languages and eventually, grudgingly, in Accord ones too. The word was for the surviving assets, all of them, the few hundred scattered ones. The old word had meant war material. The new word meant something closer to veteran, meant person, meant ours and not yours and never yours again. Joss testified once, to a council, with the whole planet watching. They asked her a lot of complicated questions and she answered them simply. And at the end, one of the Accord representatives, through a translator, asked her the question they'd all really come to ask, the one the entire war had been building to without anybody saying it out loud. He asked her, "What are you?" And Joss, 17, in a borrowed nice shirt with a scar on her neck and a melted palm and 8 weeks of high school, and a whole planet holding its breath, Joss thought about it, really thought, and then she said, "I used to be what you made me." A pause. "Now I'm a junior at Cedar Hollow High. I'm taking history and chemistry and Spanish too. I'm bad at chemistry." A few people laughed, the nervous kind. "I have a friend named Theo who saves me a seat. I like the snow. I'm going to graduate next year and I haven't decided what I want to do after." And that, her voice caught just once and steadied, "that is the most extraordinary sentence I have ever been allowed to say. I haven't decided. Do you understand what it means? To a thing that was never allowed to decide anything, to get to say, I haven't decided what I want to be." She looked right into the camera then, right at the billion people. "That's what I am. I'm someone who hasn't decided yet. I'd like to find out. That's all I ever wanted, just to be allowed to find out." There wasn't a sound in that whole chamber. She got to find out. She graduated with us, the next spring. I want you to picture it, because after everything, after the soldiers and the councils and the planet holding its breath, the thing it all came down to was so small and so ordinary that it'll break your heart in the good way. A high school graduation in a mountain town, folding chairs on the football field, cheap white gowns, a band that wasn't very good playing a song everybody knew, parents standing up too early to film their kids, the principal mangling names. And when he got to the C's, he said Joss Calderon, and she walked across that little stage in her cheap white gown, and she took her diploma in her melt-scarred hand, and she stopped just for a second and she looked out at all of us. The whole town stood up. Not just her row, not just the seniors, the whole town. Everybody in those folding chairs, all 4,000 of Cedar Hollow it felt like, people who'd hated the Selvath quiet and patient their whole lives, people who'd never in a million years thought the war would touch their stoplight town. They all stood up for the girl who dreamed of homework, and they didn't stop clapping for a long, long time. And Joss stood up there on the stage holding her diploma, and the soldier was gone from her face, gone for good I think, and what was left was just a kid at her graduation, crying again, the good kind this time, the kind with no bottom because the joy had no bottom either. She found my eyes in the crowd. I'd saved her a seat, like always, an empty chair in the family section, even though she didn't have any family, because that was the whole point. So she'd have a seat. So somebody saved it for her. She mouthed something at me, across all those people. It took me a second to read it, then I got it. Chocolate milk. I laughed so hard I cried too. I don't know what happened to the Greld in the end. I don't know how the rest of the galaxy sorted itself out, all those 1,000 species and their councils and their clean armor and their patient math. That's a story for somebody who understands it better than me. I never did get better than a C in anything that mattered. But I know what happened to Joss. She decided. Took her a couple years, but she decided. She became a teacher. History. She said somebody had once let her write 11 pages on a war and hadn't docked her for it, hadn't pushed, had just understood that she was holding onto something for dear life. And she wanted to be the one doing the understanding, on the other side of the desk, for the next kid who walked in holding onto something. She's good at it, I hear. The kids love her. They don't know what she was. Most of them weren't even born for it. To them, she's just Ms. Calderon, who's a little intense about not wasting food, and who always knows exactly where the exits are, and who'll never ever make you feel small for taking a long time to decide what you want. And every now and then I'm told when it snows, the first snow, the soft kind, she'll stop whatever she's doing, walk to the window, and just watch it come down for a minute with this look on her face, soft and open and young. Like she still can't believe she's allowed. People ask me sometimes what the lesson is, like there's supposed to be one, like a thing that big has to mean something tidy. I don't think it does. I think it just happened, the way things happen, in pieces, in a town nobody's heard of, to a girl who only ever wanted what the rest of us couldn't wait to throw away. But if you held a gun to my head, and I've had that done, so I don't say it lightly, if you made me tell you the one thing I learned, watching all of it from the back row, the nobody who happened to be standing close enough to see. The galaxy spent a war learning to be afraid of what we could destroy. It never once thought to be afraid of what we'd protect. That was always the dangerous thing about us, not the fighting. Anybody can fight. It's that we'll look at the most broken, most dangerous, most thrown away thing in the room, and instead of running, instead of doing the smart math, we'll pull out a chair and save it a seat and ask if it wants the chocolate milk. That's what they could never put in a box. That's the thing they're still afraid of, out there in the dark, the 1,000 clean and careful species who won a war by spending us and never understood what they'd spent. They're afraid we'll do to the rest of them what one scared kid in a mountain town did to 5 soldiers and a whole galaxy's worth of math. they're afraid we'll be kind to them. And honestly, they're right to be.